Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very, very special guest with us today. He is a retired Major General Richard Haddad with the United States Air Force. He spent about 35 years of active and reserve duty in the Air Force, was commissioned to the Air Force, United States Air Force, and entered active duty in 1981. He has hundreds of hours of combat flying time in operations Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, and Desert Storm. He is also the first Air Force General Officer to serve as Commander of Special Operations Command in Korea with the United States Forces in Korea. After the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, General Haddad commanded the 711th Special Operations Squadron through Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, during which this unit compiled more than 5,000 combat hours of accident-free flying and is still recognized today as the most decorated reserve flying unit. General Haddad was also the Deputy Chief to the Air Force Reserve headquartered in the Pentagon. He has hundreds of hours of combat flying in the AC-130 Spectre gunship and the MC-130 Combat Talon. His aerial combat awards include 3 Distinguished Flying Crosses with V for Valor device and 5 air medals, Bronze Star Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, Legion of Merit Meritorious Service Medal with oak leaf cluster, sorry, I can't say that, and many other awards. He is deployed to combat zones 8 times during his career, and as a civilian, he had a long and illustrious flying career with American Airlines. Please welcome Major General retired Richard Haddad.
Todd, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. And you go by Beef, so if you're all right, I'll call you Beef, or if we can go whichever way you would like to go.
Beef is fine.
Beef is fine.
But are you curious as to?
Yes, that was my first question. I've known you that you introduced yourself as Beef, so tell me how you got that name.
So after high school, I went to the Air Force Academy, but I went to the Air Force Academy prep school for a year prior to getting accepted into the academy. And the prep school is like a small high school, actually. There were about 250 students there, and primarily blue chip athletes and enlisted members who were seeking an appointment to the Air Force Academy. And it essentially prepared you for the SATs to be able to meet the requirements. Right. I had problems with my verbal score, so that's what I needed some work on. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to play football, which didn't count towards my 4 years when I played at the Air Force Academy. It was a 1-year deal where we got to play junior colleges and JV teams around the state. I think we played 5 or 6 different games. I don't really recall. And it became a really small group, close group of people there at that prep school, and especially the guys that I played football with. And a lot of the guys got nicknames while we were there, and I acquired this nickname Beef, and I think it was because I had more hair, gravity hadn't set in, a lot of this that's down low was up higher, and so the nickname pretty much lasted my entire Air Force career. And most of the time in the Air Force, fighter pilots are the guys with the nicknames. I was kind of unique because I had a nickname that was acquired from playing football at the Air Force Academy.
So did you start playing in high school, or did you not play till you got into prep? What positions did you play? I mean,
I played offense.
You're not built like a quarterback or a wide receiver.
I played offensive and defensive line.
Okay.
And I did play in high school. That was one of the reasons I went to the academy. Is I didn't do as well my senior year as I thought I could have, and so some of the opportunities that were presented to me were a couple junior colleges, a couple small 4-year schools, and I really wanted to play Division I football. My dream was to be able to go out and play for Arizona, primarily Arizona, not Arizona State. I was an Arizona fan, and that didn't come to fruition. And then I ended up getting these inquiries from the Air Force Academy to play football there. And at first, I really knew nothing about the Air Force, nor the military. My father served in World War II and the Korean War, both, one in the Army, one in the Navy. and he really never talked about his service. He was only in each for a couple of years when he was younger. And so I really didn't have anybody around me that was military oriented, so I really didn't know much about it. And at first I was not quite sure whether that was the direction I wanted to go, but after learning more about what opportunities presented themselves by going to that incredible institution and the opportunity to play Division I football, I proceeded with all the applications and letters of recommendation and those type things. And fortunately, I was accepted to go into the prep school.
So you grew up in Arizona?
I grew up in a small little copper mining town called Kearney, and the mine that's near, it's an open pit copper mine, and it started out when I was a young kid. It was owned by Kennecott Copper Corporation, headquartered out of Utah.
So the copper mine was the main industry there?
It was.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, it was. And most in a very small school, there was 100 in my graduating class, probably 350 or so in the entire high school. And a lot of the kids that graduated from there, they aspired to go to work in the mine, and get their pickup truck, marry their wife there, and live happily ever after. And it was interesting. In my class, there seemed to be quite a few that had higher aspirations to go off. I've got three wonderful friends. One worked for Hughes Aircraft, which turned into Raytheon. Another one worked for Microsoft right when they were starting, so he's done quite well for himself. And my other really good friend was a commercial real estate broker in California. So those type individuals were in high school with me. So it wasn't, it seemed like more than the average wanted to go leave the small town and do something better for themselves.
How did your family get to Arizona?
Interesting question. I'm Lebanese heritage, and
Ramona Barber always says hello whenever I see her at the Florida Realtor meeting. She says, "How was my friend Beef? How was my friend Beef?" So I'm going to tell her that we had you on the podcast.
Super. So interesting story. Somebody from this particular village in Lebanon, which is called Baskinta, it's east of Beirut. Someone from that village came to the United States and found their way across the United States to Arizona. And this was 1910 to 1912. My family immigrated in 1912, the year that Arizona became a state. It's amazing to me that these people came from Lebanon, couldn't speak English, they wanted a better life, and they went across this great country to get to Arizona because someone prior to them from that same village apparently had gone to Arizona,
and that's
why they started there. They were, there's many families from that era, and they all did quite well. There were people in the grocery business, in the clothing business. My family was in the clothing business, and apparently when they first got there, they sold clothes out of the trunks of their cars to the miners. And they started out, there were two towns right adjacent to the open pit mine called Ray and Sonora, Arizona. Ray was where all the white workers lived. Sonora was where all the Mexican American workers lived. My great-great-grandfather started his clothing store in Sonora, Arizona. My father eventually bought that store from him, and that's where I was born, in Ray. There was a hospital was in Ray, and our store and where we lived was in Sonora. Well, the copper mine decided that they wanted to mine those two towns, so they built another town called Kearney in 1958 timeframe, and that's where they moved everybody from Ray and Sonora to Kearney. So they essentially integrated the two different cultures into Kearney, which eventually I grew up there, went to high school there, elementary, high school there. So that's where I was brought up.
Did you never think that you had an interest in going back there and being in the mines, or did you always have a vision for something different for your life? Since you weren't talking about military and it wasn't in your background.
And my father was an entrepreneur. We owned a clothing store. He owned a bar. He owned a couple other businesses. He was a justice of the peace for 32 years.
Justice of the peace and owning a bar. I like that.
Pretty cool, huh? Yeah. So I worked in the clothing store from the time I was about 10 years old. They could leave me there by myself, and I could manage the store. When he started the bar, I used to go in there and do the inventory and make sure that things were in order. And I learned a lot about the business world. So your question about did I have an aspiration to go back there? I think I wanted something bigger for my life, and I think that's why I went to the Air Force Academy. I figured that this was going to be an opportunity for me to do something much bigger than being in that small little copper mining town running my father's clothing store or his bar.
Do you think your parents instilled that in you, or was it just you seeing their work ethic and the community? Or
I think my father instilled that in me. He wanted me to do more and better than what he had done. And I think that's where I got my drive in life, was from him. He was obviously, with all the things he was involved in just about every organization you can imagine: the Rotary Club, the Chamber of Commerce, the Lions Club, Elks Lodge. I mean, the list goes on and on. He was the man. And so I learned at an early age the values of hard work and responsibility and respect and all those types of things, and relationships, which we'll probably get to a little later in this podcast.
Yeah.
So I think he wanted me to do more than what he did, and I think he instilled in me those values, which allowed me to go do the things that I did in my life.
Did you play any other sports, or was football it?
No, I did a lot of things. I wrestled one year when they started a wrestling program.
Okay.
Wasn't for me. I enjoyed it that one year. I did track. I threw shot put, and I played baseball my freshman year and realized I never quit a sport, but I realized after that first year that it probably wasn't for me. I played basketball 4 years, and I did okay. I wasn't that great, but I enjoyed being a part of the basketball team. But I think the real love was the football team, and I really enjoyed playing football.
So you went off to the Air Force Academy, and you had a career at the Air Force Academy. You weren't drafted.
Nope.
Different level of players at 1A, I'm assuming, than what you were used to. But you had a famous coach that was there for 1 year, Bill Parcells.
Yep.
How was it playing? Would you have any memories of him? Or
I do. We had. Because I had 3 different head coaches in my 4 years at the academy. We didn't do very well in any of those years, but there was a progression of what has taken place today. We were kind of the building blocks for the whole wishbone offense that emerged after I left. And we actually, my senior year, we started performing that wishbone and did quite well with it. We could move the ball up and down the field, but couldn't get it past the red zone. But that worked later on as the teams got better and better at executing that particular offense. Back to Parcells, my first year was Ben Martin was the head coach. I got to travel the last game of the season to Notre Dame with Ben Martin, and I was a defensive tackle at that point. And they were national champ. Notre Dame were the national champs that year, 1977, I believe it was. And I got called in. I couldn't believe they called me in to go to the game. We were getting beat pretty bad, and I'm 250 pounds, and I'm going up against a 300-pound offensive lineman. However, the adrenaline was going, and I had like 3 unassisted tackles and almost had a sack on the quarterback. He had a tearaway jersey.
I remember that.
And I ended up with a handful of jersey. I stuffed it in my sock. It was Joe Montana's jersey. So anyway, that's my claim to fame my freshman year. Ben Martin, after he'd been there for 25 years, decided to retire, and Bill Parcells was hired to take his place. And Parcells came in from Texas Tech. He was a defensive coordinator there. And he was ready to put a team together. He wanted to, I think his aspiration was to have a winning season in his first year. and I think we went 2-9-1 that year. Didn't do very well. He wasn't very happy, and at the end of the season, he left. He left football altogether. And I read an unofficial biography that said that his family didn't want him moving anymore because they were tired of all the moves they had made during that period of time. So he ended up selling insurance or something to that effect, and then a year later he ended up in the big league. So apparently he decided that wasn't for him, and football was. And the rest of the story is you can see in his Super Bowls and everything else.
Well, it's too bad he couldn't spend 3 or 4 years there building the program at the Air Force Academy.
It would have been nice. It was a frustrating year because he was frustrated. He demanded a lot from the players, and I think he felt like he could do the same things that he may have done at regular universities. And at the Air Force Academy, it just didn't work. Guys said, "I've had enough. I'm done with football. I'll go back and become a regular cadet and continue with my education in that format." There were many times when I felt like I wanted to quit as well, but I had something to prove to myself that I could play Division I football and that I could play it for the entire duration. I wasn't going to quit.
Did you ever have any injuries?
Nothing
significant
major.
or nothing
major. Yeah, fortunately. I had a problem with the helmet. You can see I have a little long nose there, and the helmets, we tried every type of helmet, water helmets, air helmets. I've tried them all, and every time I'd go in, the first hit, I'd start bleeding at the top of my nose. And they called me the Band-Aid man because every week I'm running around with a Band-Aid on my nose. So we never could get a helmet that would fit properly. But no major injuries. So Parcells was there that one year. Interesting guy. He, as I said, I think he was a little too demanding for that type of an institution, from my perspective.
Yeah. Well, the coach has to fit the system, and the system has to fit the coach, and you can see that when one coach will go to a different university and have a lot of success.
Well, he went to the pros and had an incredible amount of success.
Right.
So, anyway, then his offensive coordinator took over, and his name was Ken Hatfield, wonderful man. And Ken Hatfield brought Fisher DeBerry from Appalachian State, and he was the brains behind the wishbone offense, which the Air Force Academy pretty much perfected and started. The year I left, they started winning seasons, and they've been pretty much doing well ever since. And that's 1981 is when I graduated. So the 1982 season, they did quite well, and they've done pretty well throughout the years. They've had a few bad years, but overall, they've done really well for them.
Todd's podcast is sponsored in part by SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate. Since 1996, the firm has offered unrivaled brokerage services throughout Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. With over 90 expert advisors throughout the region, our team has the knowledge and resources to help clients realize their most ambitious real estate investment goals. When you choose SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate, you have access to a diverse suite of commercial and land services, including forestry consulting, land management, auctions, property management, commercial leasing, and negotiating conservation easements. If you're seeking to invest in land or explore commercial real estate opportunities in the Southeast, contact us today at svnsaunders.com or call 877-518-5263 to connect with an advisor today. Once again, that's svnsaunders.com or by phone at 877-518-5263.
So you were commissioned in 81 when you graduated.
Correct.
What was your first assignment? What did you start flying? Is it something you always wanted to be a pilot, or did you have to take aptitude tests, say, hey, this guy's got the skills to fly, as opposed to something else within the service?
So at the Academy, they had a T-41 program, which was a modified Cessna 172, and you go through that, and that's kind of your first phase to see whether you have what it takes to get through pilot training.
Right.
Well, I survived that, and I wanted to fly, not because I had a lifelong dream of flying because I was at the Air Force Academy and had all these opportunities to go on in a T-33 ride, and I had the opportunity to go on a soaring mission. So, I mean, flying is what it's about. And the majority of those classes during the period of time that I went to school there went to pilot training. There were only a small percentage that didn't. That switched during the years in terms of, and the reason for that is the Air Force doesn't train as many pilots as they did back in those days. And I think you're aware of the pilot training shortage and all those types of things now. But I wanted to fly. So I lucked out. Williams Air Force Base in Arizona was the Air Force base that everyone wanted to go to for pilot training. And you had a wish list. I did pretty well militarily, nothing great. Academically, I was an average student. And the way they determined who went where was based on your priority list and your grade point average, military, your military ranking, that sort of thing. It was all pretty much included in that. Yeah. I put down Williams as my first choice for the first class, and that was, they're numbered 8206, 80. I was in 8206 with Jake, actually. Jake was in our sister squadron. And I put down the first choice. I probably wouldn't have made it other than the fact that the first class gave up 4 days of their leave. So after 4 years at the academy, guys didn't want to give up 4 days of their leave.
Right.
But I wanted to be in Arizona. That's where I grew up. And I lucked out and got my first choice. And off I went to Williams Air Force Base in Arizona and went through the T-37 program for half the year and then the T-38 program after that. And that's where they determine whether you go to heavies or whether you go to fighters. And I knew pretty early on. I had a difficult time getting through pilot training. It wasn't easy for me. And I knew early on that I was going to be flying heavies. The question was, which heavy did I want to prioritize? And I had friends from my days at the academy playing football that were senior to me. Matter of fact, one really good friend who was a senior when I was a freshman at the academy, I asked him, he'd gone to C-130s. And so he gave me a perspective of what the C-130 was like and getting to fly a 4-engine prop plane that was very maneuverable and did some really incredible things. So, you know, it was somewhere between a fighter and a C-141 or C-5 type of an airplane. And I thought that would be pretty neat to fly a C-130. So I put that as my top priority.
Cool.
And successful.
Seemed to have worked out quite well for you.
It worked out for me.
Was it Commissioner Braswell that we had on that did not want to be a fighter pilot because he didn't like the mask over his face?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, he flew
Right.
airline pilot and he
Yeah.
flew the transports and that kind of stuff. And he said, I just didn't like having the mask over my face like that. And he said, in the big planes, you don't have to do that.
Sure.
And so it's interesting how different people's life takes them through whatever. So you join the military, you join the Air Force, you get married in 83.
84. Yeah.
We can talk about that a little later, but you then start getting stationed all around. How long does it take to learn how to fly the C-130 or the big heavies? Is it a 9-month course?
I think I believe it was a 6-month course, and it was after I graduated from the year at Williams.
Right.
It was wasn't even 6 months. I can't remember, Todd. It was
Okay.
too long ago, but I think it was 3 to 6 months, somewhere around there. And the course was at Little Rock Air Force Base.
Okay.
So that's where I started to learn to fly the C-130.
Okay.
And while I was there, my assignment was for Pope Air Force Base in North Carolina. And there was another guy that had been at Williams in a class ahead of me who was now at 130 training at Little Rock.
Right.
And we got to talking. He didn't want to go. His assignment was Yokota Air Base, Japan. And he didn't want to go there because he had just gotten married. His wife was a CPA, if I remember correctly, and didn't want to get up and move to an international site. So we called our personnel center to see if we could do a swap. And they went along with it. And my first assignment was Yokota Air Base, Japan, which is on the outskirts of Tokyo, which was the greatest opportunity that I could have ever had, getting the opportunity to go to Japan to fly basic C-130s. I got to fly around the Pacific. I ended up going to places like the Philippines and Korea and Okinawa and I didn't make Hong Kong, Indonesia, Malaysia, all over the Pacific. And that's where I met my wife, Ginger, who was a JAG in the Air Force.
Right. So where's your favorite place to live? I mean, you've been all over. I know I'm going to hope you say Tampa now, but
well, you make the best of wherever you're at. I mean, everything has its ups and its pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
Tampa's awesome because my grandchildren are 10 minutes down the road. So that's what makes it so ideal living here in Tampa. The Panhandle, we lived up there for many, many years, and it's just a beautiful place up in the Panhandle. The beaches are beautiful, and it's just a wonderful place it was a wonderful place to raise our two daughters. So it just depends. I mean, I've never had a bad assignment, to be quite honest. I know some people do, and then when you get to talking to them, especially the ones that are in overseas assignments that didn't like it, you ask them, well, what did you do? Well, they stayed on the base and they never left and explored. I mean, Japan was incredible. I mean, it was so much to see, so much to do, and it was a great place to date my wife for those years that we were doing that.
Excellent. So you start your active duty career, and I think we talked in there that you had done 8 combat missions. Do you want to talk about that at all? You were special ops pilot, special operations pilot. You've got incredible recognition and service awards for valor and a lot of the things that you've done. A lot of people have heard The Highway to Death. That was in the book that you had written, and Leadership from 30,000 Feet. I reread that a couple of nights ago, and you talked about that. And I'm interested to see your mental state of commanding a crew versus just a fighter jet or a pointy jet, as some of those guys call them, little pointy jets.
Yeah.
You've got responsibilities for a lot of people just on your plane, and how do you prepare for something like that?
Well, let's go back at the way I got into the special ops community. Was I told you I met my wife at Yokota, and she was a JAG, a Judge Advocate General, lawyer, and trying to find a joint spouse assignment was difficult back in those days. So the only thing that was available to me was to go to Hurlburt Field and her to Eglin Air Force Base. And Hurlburt was a gunship, AC-130 squadron. And I was told by some of the older guys at Yokota I was making the biggest mistake of my life. That was a dead end assignment. Well, I got there, and there was this reinvigoration of the special ops community, and especially at AFSA, Air Force Special Ops Command. And so my career took off at that point. It didn't take me long to become an evaluator, or become an aircraft commander, and then an instructor, an evaluator. It was just the progression was very quick once I got there, which was totally in opposition to what they said I was going to incur. And the reason for that is, as I said, there was this reinvigoration into the special ops community. So I flew the gunship for 3 years, from 85 to 88 on active duty, and then I transitioned to the reserve in 1988. And the first opportunity to go to war was not on active duty, but it was while I was in the reserves. And in the fall of 90, I wanted to see what it was all about. Desert Storm had started, Desert Shield actually, and I wanted to go. I wanted to participate. So there was an opportunity to go as a ground guy with a basic C-130 organization out of Milwaukee, a reserve unit. They needed some augmentees, and I went with them, and I was there. I was at Sharjah for 1 month near Dubai. and didn't get to fly, but I was on the ground getting to see what going to war was all about, thinking that we were never going to take this old AC-130A model to war. So I got back and found out that we were going to go to war and that I was going to deploy with a 5-ship, and I was going to lead that 5-ship of A-model gunships to the desert. And
was that uncommon for a reservist to lead something like that?
Well,
or?
this was a reserve organization.
Okay.
All those airplanes.
All those planes were all in the reserve.
On the reserves.
Okay, so
the active duty had already gone.
Okay.
They had deployed. And now the A models were going.
Okay.
The active duty H model 130s have external tanks. They can fly longer. They have refueling capability, air refueling capability. The A model did not. So it was going to take a while to get there. I don't remember how many stops we made, layovers and refueling. We ended up stopping. It's called the Blue Spruce route. It takes you up over Goose Bay and down to Ireland, Germany, that sort of thing. And it was interesting. We got to Goose Bay and the winds were so bad, and all we were doing there was refueling. And it's snowing, it's blowing, and it was a little harrowing getting out of there. Then we went to, and I'm thinking it was Rota. Rota, Spain is one of the layovers. We're there, and guys are calling back to talk to their wives, and they find out that an H model had been shot down. And that was Spectre 03 that had been shot down over on the coast of Kuwait. So here we are with 5 crews of reservists. And these are guys that have other jobs. This is not their primary job. We had lawyers, we had CPAs, we had farmers, we had, you name it. We had just about every kind of occupation you can imagine that were flying these airplanes. And the majority had never been to war before. Now, I would say there was probably 1% of those 5 crews that had been to Vietnam. Older group of gentlemen, because they had already served on active duty and they're in the reserves. So you have this older group, and I think they were shocked by the fact that we were heading to a place where potentially get shot down. It was very difficult to hear those words that a gunship had been shot down, and that could be us in a few more days.
Right.
It was tough maintaining the esprit de corps and keeping people motivated, but we obviously had a job to do, and we'd been training all those years, so it was now a time that we had to proceed. So there was no turning back. It was just a matter of getting everybody's mind right and realizing that we don't know what happened. We don't have the story. We'll get it when we get there, but we need to keep going. And we got there and found out that they were going after Scuds, if you've read anything
right.
about it. And that airplane was up a little too long. Gunships do their missions at night. They're not up during the daytime. And I think they stayed out a little longer than they should have. They were hit by a SAM, and things changed at that point. Schwarzkopf was in charge, and I think they had made a decision that the gunships were no longer going to be used for going after Scuds and radars. That's not what the primary mission of that airplane was for. So when we got there, we essentially were doing reconnaissance on the Kuwaiti Saudi, on the Kuwaiti Iraqi border, and it was somewhat monotonous. You're just flying around doing reconnaissance.
Well,
That's essentially what we were doing.
How do you keep the spirits up and the focus of your crew when the plane was shot down and everyone's going, oh my gosh, that could be us in 3 days, and you've got to get them focused on their task at hand to perform at a high level?
Yeah, well, that was the point I was making, is we all knew we had a job to do. There was no turning back. We had to focus on the mission, and we had to realize that we didn't have all the details on what had happened, and we would find that out once we arrived at the location that we were going to. And we did. We found out that maybe they were up a little longer than they were supposed to, and the mission changed at that point. So our role was changed in terms of what our what the missions were at that point. So we were essentially, as I said, doing reconnaissance over the border, which was a bit monotonous. And on this one particular day, we would go up, one airplane would do its mission, and then the next airplane would go in and replace them. And on this particular night, I was number 2. And the first airplane was doing its thing, and they got called into a kill box on the Highway of Death, which you've read about. Right. And I was the second airplane. So the first plane goes into this kill box, but they got called into it, laid into their orbit, and they didn't have much time left, fuel on board. They had to get back home. And it was amazing. They were having it was like target practice, because there were so many, the Iraqis were running home, and they had all their vehicles and personnel and trucks and everything were heading north. And this gunship is getting the opportunity to destroy some of those targets. They called me up and said, you need to hurry up, because we're about bingo fuel and we're going to have to leave. And this is a target of opportunity. You need to get up here. I had a full load of fuel and a full load of ammunition, and we just essentially destroyed a number of targets while we were on orbit there. And about towards the end of our orbiting, we stirred up the hornet's nest. I think they started setting up their AAA sites and started shooting, and we realized we needed to get out of Dodge. So we headed south. The third airplane made one, and we had informed them that it was getting pretty hot. They made one orbit and they had to leave. So it was an incredible opportunity to take a crew that had never been to war and to perform the way we did on that highway to death. The guys were ecstatic. They really didn't want to leave. They wanted to continue to stay on the target and continue to shoot, but it started getting dangerous and we needed to get out of there.
Hey, listeners.
Hey, everyone.
Hola.
Hi, all.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, this is Rob Palumbo.
This is Fred Hyde.
This is Juliet Ashley Vide.
Dr. Angela Garcia Falconetti.
This is Congressman Scott Franklin.
This is Margie Grant.
This is Jake Palumbo.
And I want to thank you for listening to Todd's podcast.
Thank you for listening to Todd's podcast.
Thank you for listening to Todd's podcast.
Please make sure that you like and or subscribe.
Don't forget
Don't forget to subscribe to Todd's podcast on your favorite podcast app. Tune in and listen.
Join in and listen to us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So were the senior guys up front in the cockpit, and you got the younger guys in the back that are shooting, or do you have some of the older reservists that are in the back helping run the crew in the
There's
back?
Ages were
all over the place.
All over the place. Some of the gunners were some of the most senior guys. They've been doing this for years and years. We had some old guys back there. So yeah, the younger guys were probably some of us, the pilots and that sort of thing.
Well, how long would that mission have taken you? I mean, would you have been flying for 3 hours, 5 hours? What's a typical mission that you would go out and fly?
3 to 5 hours.
3 to 5.
Yeah, that was pretty good perspective, because we had a long flight from where we were located up to the border, and that took up a considerable amount of time. So
in the book, the Two Blue Aces wrote Leadership from 30,000 Feet. You were one of the 5 authors. You talk about relationships, and you've spoken about relationships, and that's what I've always wanted to hear you talk when you do, because I enjoy that part of what you talk about. Part of it was the relationships that you had formed to be able to set up the base over there. Scrounging around, I think, was the word you used. Talk about the importance of relationships, because I personally think they're as important as much as anything is to be able to talk to people and to have that relationship, so that when you need them or they need you, you've already pulled the barrier down.
I think relationships are what it's all about. I mean, I had it on my coin. It's all about relationships. I watched my dad. We talked about that earlier. I mean, the relationships that he built in the business world and as a judge and those type things. So I think I was introduced to it early in my life, to be quite honest. And then the relationships I developed at the prep school and the Air Force Academy. So it was always there. And then I get into the 130 world, And as a young co-pilot, I see the relationships that the aircraft commander has to have with the people on the crew. Yeah, you could be a good pilot, but if you haven't developed the relationships with the enlisted guys, the engineer and the load master and the navigator and all those types of people,
And the guys on the ground. that
and the
fix your
guys
plane.
and the guys on the ground, you'll probably be successful, but you're not going to really take it up another notch. And I saw this my entire career, and I tried to develop that same kind of attitude, but it really didn't put a label on it until I was in Iraq. And I was asked in 2006 by a mentor who had been over there starting the post-Saddam Iraqi Air Force Base. And he needed someone to go over there and start the first C-130 base at Baghdad International. The name of the base was New Al Mathana Air Base. And we had gifted the Iraqis 3 C-130s, and and we had a group of maintainers and pilots training them at Talil Air Base. And we had about a dozen guys at New Al Mathana helping with the construction of this base that we had previously destroyed. It had been an Air Force base, and then it became a Republican Guard base, and we had destroyed that base. Now we spent millions of dollars of rebuilding it, and I went over there with this group of guys. They're mostly enlisted. There was a lieutenant colonel who was kind of there, and a young captain, and maybe two captains, yeah, and the rest were enlisted. Civil engineer, guys that were that knew about motor pool, that knew about logistics, that knew about all different variations of our Air Force, things that we take for granted when we walk onto a base.
That's already been set up.
It's already been set up. They were there to set this base up for the future. And here I am, a C-130 pilot. I show up as a colonel to kind of manage this team. We had one Danish supply sergeant, so it was somewhat international. We had a a sergeant major, Army sergeant major, when I first got there. And they had been working with about 30 Iraqis, including the base commander, who was a one-star, General Karim. And I'll talk about that more. But they were there to watch this company from Toledo, Ohio, that was rebuilding this base and helping with getting it all constructed properly so that we could bring these C-130s and these maintainers and these operators from Talil and start this base. And as I said, the only tool I had in my tool bag that was probably going to be worth a darn was the developing of relationships. I got to be really close with the Iraqis. I think they looked at me from my Lebanese heritage and looked at me as someone that they could trust, and the feeling was somewhat mutual. And they listened to what I had to say, and we worked as a team, and we got this base to a level that we needed to. And I only had a couple weeks before these airplanes were going to be delivered. And I met everybody I could around the installation. I mean, we're still in a war zone, but I met people from different services. I met, there was a State Department annex there. The State Department was really in the green zone, but they had an annex at the airport. And it was Saddam Hussein's old VIP lounge. So I was over there on this one particular day, and I was doing everything I could to get all the resources that we needed, because their supply system, the Iraqis' big supply system, was not in place yet. The banking system was not in place. There was nothing structured like we would know how to do it in our country, where we would have an acquisition process to be able to acquire the tools and resources we need to put this thing together. So I was borrowing, and stealing, essentially, what I was doing to help them get this base to the level that we needed to accept those.
And kind of starting with a blank slate.
Exactly.
I mean, you didn't have any real infrastructure at all.
Nothing. Well, the buildings.
The buildings.
That was it. And so I was at the State Department visiting with the folks that I met there, and they had all this furniture stacked up outside. I says, "What's with all the furniture?" They said, we're getting rid of this. We're bringing in Western furniture. I said, really? I said, can I have it? And he said, absolutely. Just, you're going to figure out how to get it out of here. So I went to my other friend, who was the air base commander, who I'd developed a relationship. His name was Dennis Ployer. I says, hey, Denny, I need a truck and some guys to help me out. He said, sure. So we got this big deuce and a half and took it to the State Department, filled this thing up to the brim with all this incredible furniture. I mean, tons of furniture. And we drove back to our base, went through the gate, and I pull into the center. There's like a center area in the buildings were on the perimeter. And these Iraqis are coming out. And I sense this odd look on their faces. And, I speak a little Arabic. I thought I was going to get fluent while I was there. I didn't. I mean, it's a different dialect than the Lebanese, but I was able to understand and carry on a little bit of conversation. I couldn't figure out what was going on here. It was very odd. And so I got them to unload the furniture. They were putting it in different rooms. There was a bit of an excitement, but there was also this strange sensation. So that night, like many nights, I would sit with the Iraqi general and his colonels and drink tea. I had more tea than you can shake a stick at, tea and coffee. And they loved talking. I mean, they had a lot of questions about, us and why this occupation. And, there was a lot of things they touched on that I couldn't really get into, politics and that sort of thing. But that particular night, the general looks at me and he said, Colonel Haddad, he said, we can't thank you enough for what you and your folks are doing for us. This is pretty, there's just not enough thanks to go around for all that you've done. But we want you to understand that what you did today, it's all about relationships. And they were expressing to me the fact that we had developed these relationships that helped them. And it hit me. It's all about relationships. Right. And that's when I put I put that label on it. And it really was about the relationship piece. And anyway, during that course of the conversation, I said, well, General Kareem, you're very excited about all this furniture now, but it seemed like people were really not very excited when we were unloading it. What was the problem? He said, well, they were in shock because that was Saddam Hussein's furniture. I said, well, how do you know that? He says, because the symbols on the upholstery was his symbology. So they were amazed that they were going to be sitting on Saddam Hussein's furniture. And as another side note, get off on a tangent a little bit, Saddam Hussein was a Sunni Muslim. The Sunnis were the minority in Iraq. The Shiites were the majority. The general that I got to be close with was a Shiite. And a lot of the pilots that were hired were Sunni pilots. And I asked him one day, I says, General Kareem, why did you hire all the Sunnis and not Shiis? He said, well, the Shiis weren't qualified and these were the better pilots. So it had nothing to do with their religion. It was who's going to be the best at that job to be able to do the job. So it was really interesting. I cherish that opportunity that I had to be over there for 6 months with these people and to learn, what they have been going through all their years and there's trials and tribulations and it was just it was a difficult environment to be in.
I found one of your comments, and I think it was in that story where the soldiers, they wanted to do very well because they didn't want people thinking they were fighting for Saddam anymore. They wanted people to know they were fighting for their country.
Right.
And that had to be a monumental shift in the mentality over there. And the thinking is that people then were saying, there's a greater thing here than this dictator that we've been having to serve against our will. So
at the expense of being killed, my friend, the general, would come on to the base. He lived off base. He would come onto the base in this old rickety car with a taxi sign in the front. The reason he had to come on that old car, because if anybody found out that he was working with the Americans, he would have been assassinated. And a few years after I left, he was assassinated. And so was the vice commander, so was the maintenance colonel. A lot of them were killed for working with the Americans to set up this base and fly these airplanes that were there to protect their best interests. So 2 weeks after I was there, we got all the 3 airplanes and all the maintainers and all the operators, both Iraqi and Americans. So I went from about 40, 50 people on this base to almost 300 overnight. And it was very challenging. We had to set up a medical clinic, security forces, operations, maintenance, life support. As I said, everything you take for granted, we had to set that up from scratch. So it was pretty neat to see it evolve and to see the successes that we had.
Another story that you had mentioned in the book, I think it was on the chapter on compassion, about getting to know the men and women in your command, the men and women that you are in charge of, that their parents have given you the responsibility for their children, is the importance of getting to know them and not just, hey, this is Jim and he's from Toledo, Ohio, but to know them and the importance of that. And I think that's a lesson that those of us on the private side in the business world can and should take a look at.
Absolutely. I think a lot of these lessons that I share can be translated from the military to any world, to be quite honest. I'd sit at the staff in my staff meetings with a group of people around me, and just like I would be if I was a CEO of a company, I've got a staff around me. I can't know everybody in the company.
Right.
I had 70,000 reservists when I was the vice commander of the Air Force Reserve, but the people at that table, I should know. I should know everything about them. I should understand them. And the reason for that is I believe it takes it up a notch in terms of being able. Just we talked about the pilot, the pilot that's a good pilot but may not get along well with the crew or doesn't interact well. He's going to get the job done. We're going to get the job done, but we're not going to take it to that higher level. I felt like you could take it to that higher level by understanding your people, knowing about them, working with them. And the story that really permeates that discussion was one that General Welsh, when he was the chief of staff, he gave a speech at the Air Force Academy, and he talked about knowing your people, essentially. And he was the wing commander in Korea, an F-16 guy. And he'd fly every now and then, and he had this kid who was a wonderful kid that was his crew chief. Get him ready, get him in the airplane, get his ejection seat ready, his parachute, all that kind of stuff. Just a wonderful kid. And he really never got to know him. He didn't ask him about his family or anything else. One day, this kid, and when he saw him outside of his working conditions, he had earrings, he just looked like a mess. So on this one particular day, this kid's supervisor and first sergeant are walking him to the wing commander's office. And the wing commander's thinking, what did this kid do? And they walk in and say, Colonel Welsh, we've got a little problem here. This kid is divorced. His wife has custody. She lives in Utah, I think, and there was a custody case for the kid in Phoenix. She was a drug addict. And his work ethic, to go back on the story, he started doing poorly out there, and the people were seeing it. They couldn't understand why. So then, fast forward, we talk about him being in the office. He was dreading the fact that he was not going to be in this courtroom to be able to get custody of this kid, knowing that the ex-wife was a drug addict.
Right.
So this was like on a Thursday or something, the Friday, and this court case was going to be Monday morning. Colonel Welsh did what they needed to do to get this kid back to Arizona to be able to get to that court hearing. The thing that General Welsh asked in that discussion, in that speech, was, why didn't I know this? Why did it take to that point for me to understand? I walked out with this kid every day to go fly when I flew. Why didn't I talk to him about his family? Why didn't I know? And that's kind of what I talk about with relationships. I should understand the issues and concerns with the people that are in my immediate future, in my immediate capacity there, to understand what their concerns and issues are. It's about relationships with your subordinates, your superiors, with in the military, your joint partners, the relationships with the Army, the Navy, the Marines. It's with your family primarily. And the hardest one to develop those relationships sometimes is your family.
Right.
And I see that in my own life. I think I do better with people outside of my family than I do with my own family members. And that can be somewhat frustrating. So I think relationships are huge. I mean, you can talk about all the leadership attributes in the world, but if you haven't developed that relationship with the people you're working with, then it becomes really difficult.
And again, not just military and every aspect.
Every
whether it's
aspect.
Our company, your company, anybody's company. Hey everybody, this is your host Todd Dantzler, and I hope you're enjoying this episode. I would like to take a moment to do a shameless plug for my real estate business. As most of you know, I'm a partner with SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate, but I am also a working broker who is very active in listing and selling real estate. I've been in this business for over 41 years. I know, you're thinking he can't be, he's so young looking, but no, it's true. I've been actively listing and selling commercial real estate my entire working career on properties ranging from ag land to multifamily projects to office and commercial and industrial properties. I have held the distinguished CCIM designation since 1991. This is the highest designation you can achieve in the commercial real estate field. I believe that a big part of my success in the real estate business is because of the relationships that I have fostered throughout the state of Florida and also right here in Polk County. So if you have any real estate needs in buying or selling, please give me a call to see if I can help out. My direct line to my desk is 863-877-2846. Again, that's 863-877-2846. I want to shift gears a little bit, just talk about the military and the Air Force in general. How is our state of readiness right now? And I don't want to get into politics because that's not what I want to do this podcast about, but are we really in pretty good shape, or is it as bad as what they say on the news? Or if you don't like this news channel, just switch to another one and they'll give you a different opinion.
Well, I've been out of it, so
right.
I'm not at the pulse of the military anymore and understanding what's going on. But I can tell you this. We have the strongest military in the world. When you look at our budget for our military and the capabilities that we have and the innovation and the things that we do in our military, they can't compare to the top 6 other nations in the world that we compete with in terms of their budgets and their capability. Right. I mean, there's nobody that can compare to our military. So in answer to, it's kind of a round circle around your question. I don't think that we have a concern with regard to what our military capability is today. So
that's good. You had made the comment that the Air Force may not be training as many pilots as they used to, the Air Force Academy. When we first started, I don't know if I misinterpreted that.
You're right, but we don't have as many airplanes as we did back in those days either. And the airplanes we have are more advanced, and we have a lot of airplanes that don't require pilots. So, that all that technology is changing the way we fight wars today. And it's very complex. It's very innovative. It's very computerized. It's very knowledge centric. It's Star Wars. It's a situation that I wasn't trained to do when I was a young lieutenant. It evolved over the years in terms of seeing this capability that we have today.
You're also on the Florida Defense Support Task Force, I think is the name of that.
Yeah.
Is that commissioned by the governor? Is that commissioned by the Air Force? Who's in charge of that?
That's the governor's task force.
The governor's task force.
And there's different you get appointment from a senator or a representative or the governor. And the task force is designed to kind of make sure that the 20 plus major installations in the state of Florida are viable for the future. Some people used to say to make sure they're BRAC proof, but you can't, and BRAC is base realignment and closure.
Right.
You can't BRAC proof something, but you can make sure that the encroachment issues that exist are resolved, that anything that the state can do to help with the readiness and the mission on those bases are done. And it's really neat because we have senators and representatives and general officers and civilians that sit on
That are all on that committee.
all on that board. Yeah. So
you guys that are appointed or selected, are you regional? Like, are you the Central Florida, or you've got to know about all 20 bases? You're not just advocating for those that are.
well,
And 100
you're centric. So in other words, you have to know about the bases because we travel every
Right.
other month or whatever. We'll go to another base to understand what the issues are. And we had it's kind of a discussion on the qualities of the base in terms of what are the issues that exist there. How can we respond to them? And so I live in Tampa, but we have another guy in Tampa, Chip Deal, and Chip has been there for quite a while. He was a former base commander there. He pretty much looks at MacDill and takes care of MacDill and focuses on that. Me being a special ops guy, I focus on SOCOM and AFSOC. So in my meetings, I'll try to report the current events that exist at AFSOC and SOCOM. So those are my areas that I look at, and we'll do whatever it needs. A lot of the laws that have been passed that support our military in some way, shape, or form are a result of what we've discussed in those meetings. Reciprocity in terms of military members, spouses, licensing, all those kinds of things were ideas that came up during this task force, and it's been a great opportunity to be a part of it, to watch how we support these different installations around our state.
Do you miss flying in the reserves? And you also flew for American.
I flew for TWA and then American bought us in 2000.
Do you miss that part of your life?
No, the military flying is a young man's game, and I'm an old guy now. So the airlines, I miss the actual flying of airplanes.
Right.
I don't miss really anything else. I'm content with going to the gym every now and then and hanging out with grandchildren.
Taking up pickleball, I understand.
Taking up pickleball.
What was your favorite route to fly as an airline pilot?
So I love international. It's just so neat to see these different cities around the world. In my last few years with the airline, I came back after about a 9-year leave of absence from the airline, and I went back to American, and I flew a 777 out of Miami in the right seat. I wasn't. If I would have gone to left seat, it would have been domestic somewhere.
Right.
I wanted to go international. It was really neat. I got to fly to all this South America. Went to Argentina, Chile, and Brazil, and also went to Europe, London, Paris, Madrid, Barcelona, all those different places. So they're all wonderful. I mean, I've told you when you asked me about the assignments, it's what you make of it.
Yeah,
and
if you just stay at the airport, you don't enjoy it.
If you stay in the hotel, you're not going to enjoy Argentina. But if you get out and see the architecture and the food's
Eat
amazing.
the food.
Yeah.
I spent a month in Argentina, and it was absolutely incredible. Yeah. Do you like going to air shows? Do they have any interest at all into you? Or
I took my daughter and her family to this last one at MacDill. I mean, I've been to a few over the years. They're fun to go to. I wouldn't say I love it and I thrive to go to air shows, but they're enjoyable. I haven't been to Sun and Fun yet.
Okay.
I would like to go to that someday.
I went once with Jake Palumbo, and it's kind of fun watching the young cadets come up and recognize him, and for him to kind of give you background information on the different planes. And then I really enjoy going with my son, who's an airplane mechanic, so he gives me a different perspective than what you and the other officers did. So it was always kind of fun. But, at some point you just kind of leave that part behind. And if your grandkids like it, you'll probably go to more of them. And if they don't, you may not.
Yeah. Well, Jake's a great guy. He's a good guy to go with. He's a classmate who I've known my, entire adult life. So
If he shows up, we're going to let him take us to lunch. If
Oh,
not,
perfect.
You never know. I kind of want to. We're getting towards the end of it, and I kind of want to wrap it up. We call it kind of a lightning round, where we give you some quick questions, and you kind of give us quick answers, and if that's of interest to you. What's your favorite food?
Lebanese food, of course, Middle Eastern.
Okay, I understand you're a very good cook.
Yeah, I like to cook.
What I heard, pork chops are like one of your better things, but what do you like to cook?
Oh, just about everything. I've got, lately I've got into the sous vide. You know anything
sous
about
vide.
that?
My son did that too.
That's pretty cool. I mean, it makes it really easy to do a steak and have it perfectly cooked.
Yeah.
I'll do a little of everything.
Does your wife like to cook, or are you the cook for her?
No, she's the big cook.
She's the big cook?
Yeah, she loves to cook.
What's her favorite food?
Oh, she does just about everything. But I think her favorite meal is Thanksgiving.
Good.
Yeah.
Do you think it's probably the celebration of everything and having everyone around, or is it just cooking the actual food? I would think that knowing her, that it's got to be having everybody.
Yeah, it's having
around.
everybody over, having the family over.
How about music? You a music fan?
I like every kind of music. I've got my XM Cirrus on the 60s, so I like the 60s music.
I have mine when I'm listening to music, the 70s and 80s. The 60s I can give a little bit of. The 90s not so much, but I'm a 70s and 80s guy. Are you a dancer? Do you like to dance?
Yeah, we haven't danced in a long time, but I do enjoy it. So,
movies. Do you like movies?
Yeah,
what's your favorite genre?
Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, my problem is I'll watch a movie and I'll forget what I watched, you know. But recently we went to see Oppenheimer, which was pretty cool, and Killers of the Flower Moon. I don't know if you've seen that one.
I have not.
That was pretty impressive.
I want to go see Oppenheimer.
But there's some movies that play over and over in our house, and that's because I'll give you one example. My wife is a baseball freak. Her father and uncle played in the 30s and 40s, and our two daughters, she got them hooked on Sandlot. I don't know if you've seen that movie. And so now our grandkids, every time they spend the night, they want to watch Sandlot, which is a great movie about baseball. I don't know if you've seen it.
It's been a long time. Isn't that where there's a big St. Bernard or some big dog?
Yeah.
Who would play you in a movie if Spielberg produced it? Who would be the star of your movie?
Well, it'd have to be someone pretty large, right?
Not necessarily. It could be Harrison Ford.
Well, I was
a younger Harrison Ford
until he became a kind of a kook. I would say someone like Steven Seagal. But I think he lives in Russia now, and he and Putin are big buddies.
He is on the dark side. It seems like. I just wonder what flips some people's switches every. I
don't know. Maybe, but back in his day when he was a pretty cool dude, I would have preferred someone like Steven Seagal to play me, but I doubt that would ever happen. But thanks for that question anyway.
Well, he dyes his hair black, so it looks like he's still in his 20s playing the Italian guys and the gangs of New Jersey or whatever. Have you ever thought about politics, being in elected office?
I did. As I said, my dad was a judge for 30 some years. It was an elected position. I watched him go through elections every 4 years. And I knew that someday I'd want to get involved. I didn't realize it was going to be as early as it was. In 1996, I was approached to run for the state senate up in the Panhandle of Florida.
Who approached you, Dempsey Barron?
Nope, Darrell Jones, who was a Senate majority leader at the time.
I remember that name too.
And I don't know how he got my name or whatever, but I'd prefer not to get into the R's and the D's, but I was a D.
Right.
My dad was a D. I used to be. I still remember Morris Udall and Dennis DeConcini and Governor Representative Goldwater, and all these people would come to Kearney. They'd come to our clothing store and see my dad. My dad would take them around town and show them around. Matter of fact, Goldwater gave me my appointment to the academy.
Wow.
So, but I knew someday I wanted to get involved because I really liked it. It was pretty cool to be a part of that world. And I didn't realize it was going to happen at that stage in my life, that I was going to get this opportunity. So I did some soul searching, and I asked a lot of friends what they thought about me running for state senate. They said, hey, shoot, this bus only comes around every now and then. Right. Give it a shot. So I went for it. The problem problem was I didn't get really rolling until July. I got to go to Tallahassee and meet Governor Childs, and got to go sit on the floor and watch the sessions. And
that was kind of the last swan song of the Democrats
It was.
in Tallahassee.
It was.
And Jeb came in and
switched.
through the Republican Revolution.
Correct.
Took over. It'll swing back. It will.
It always does.
I promise you, it will swing back.
So you probably someone would ask, well, why do you run as Democrat? Blah blah blah. I mean, there are some things on both parties that I like, but I felt like being a yo-yo jumping back and forth was not the right thing to do. I stuck to the fact that I grew up a Democrat and I liked some of the things that they were involved in. Yeah. So I ran, and so I didn't get started until July.
That is late.
That was very late. Very late. We had no money.
Yeah.
Had no staff. Had nothing. About 2 weeks into it, I finally got I think they saw I hit the ground running, and the party saw that I could be a viable candidate, started seeing some support. Ended up with this little guy from University of Florida. They had a degree there in campaigning.
Really?
And this guy had gotten his master's degree there at that particular time. He shows up at my door. We set up campaign headquarters in my family room. And we strategized that we were going to be able to, we had to start backwards from November 3rd back. And that's how the money was established. We really weren't going to get rolling until like September, to be quite honest. Right. So we did a poll about 2 weeks into it. And the only people that really knew me were from my military time there at Hurlburt and Duke Field. I had 7 points. 7 points. 2 weeks before the election, I was 7 points down. Wow. So we did pretty well. But here's the sad commentary. I learned a lot about our political system. I never want to do it again. I enjoyed the opportunity. I enjoyed learning about it. But I spent $250,000. The guy that beat me spent $1 million because he had to get through his Republican candidates. Yes. And the job at that time in 1996, the state Senate in Florida paid $27,500.
I think it pays 28 or 29 now. And my brother did the same thing. I remember in the 90s when he ran for the state Senate and then he won. He knew who you were. Right. We talked about it over the weekend. He was raising $250,000, $500,000. Said, there should be some law that you can't. Your budget should be no more than three times the salary.
Look at the presidents; they're raising millions and millions. It just doesn't make sense. Right. So I enjoyed it. I had a time of my life. I learned a lot about our political process. Yeah. But I don't think I'd ever want to do it again.
Well, I brought that up because I think you would be an excellent local official. I really do, because it's more
relationships.
It's relationships. It's competency. You're operating your county, you're operating your city, and it's not so ideological. There is some ideology that comes in it, but you're making sure toilets flush, you're making sure the sheriff is funded to get there, and you're making sure the ambulance arrive when they say they're going to do, and you're making sure potholes are fixed. I think you would be excellent at it.
This is speaking from experience.
Well, I did it, and I'm glad I'm out of it too. So, is there anything that we didn't discuss that you might wanted to discuss?
I'm pretty proud of my wife and 2 daughters. I had a wife who served 25 years in the Air Force, 15 reserve, 10 active, and she taught school in Florida for 20-some years. And I have a daughter who's an attorney here in Tampa, and another daughter who's an emergency room doctor in Michigan. So really, and I was gone all the time. As you said, I had 8 deployments to the desert during those years, and so I credit my wife with raising 2 incredible.
I don't think spouses and families get enough credit for the support they give, and I know it's hard on them, and not all survive. But the fact that she was able to keep your family going, keeping your daughters, obviously quite productive in life and incredible young ladies. I've not met them, but I met your wife. I think spouses and families don't get nearly the credit that they deserve for the teamwork that goes in for you or the other men or women that are actually deployed overseas.
Yeah, so I made it a point when I promoted someone or retired someone that it's the wife has as much to do
Right.
with that as the spouse or partner has as much to do with that as the individual, because I wouldn't be able to do the things
Right.
I did without the support of my family. So
I always
it's
thought it was
huge.
neat that whoever's in the military, their spouse is one rank higher. So if you're a 2-star, your wife's a 3-star.
Well, she claims the reason I got to where I was having a lawyer in the house.
There
which
you
there
go.
might be
It may
might
be
be
some truth to it.
that.
A smart lawyer at that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I want to thank you for your many, many years of service, the service of your family, the gift that your family gave the country, and their sacrifices that they made, and not just your family, but all the military families. I want to thank you for coming over. We're going to wrap it up here. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to hear more from Beef, he's a co-author of a book, Leadership at 30,000 Feet. I think it's $9, $10, $11 on Amazon. It's an easy read. I read your 5 chapters again Tuesday night to prepare for this. I read it a couple years ago when it first came out. Also, 2 Blue Aces, of which you are one of the senior advisors. They do speaking engagements. They do leadership training. And if you want to, hire any of them, just go to 2blueaces.com. And they can talk about anything from a very high level. And this is probably the 4th time I've heard you talk a little bit about relationships, but I've heard you in formal settings, and it's an incredible experience, and I highly encourage it. So thank you very much, General, for your time coming in. And I hope you had a good time, and look forward to having lunch with you if Jake ever shows up.
Yeah.
If not, I'll treat.
Well, I had a blast, and thanks, Todd, for allowing me the opportunity to be on your
Absolutely.
podcast. It's fun. I really enjoyed this little opportunity you gave me today.
Thank you, Beef. I appreciate
bet.
it. Hey, everybody. I want to thank you for listening to Todd's podcast. This has been your host, Todd Dantzler. If you enjoyed today's episode of Todd's podcast, I encourage you to listen next time, where we'll have Dan Levy and Cynthia Henderson. They'll be talking about everything you want to know about algae and some of the efforts that are going on at Bonnet Springs Park to clean up the water there, and projects that they are heading up around the state and around the world. As always, don't forget to rate, review, follow, and subscribe to Todd's podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions for me or any suggestions for future guests, please call or text our number at 863-288-0944 or visit todddantzler.com. Again, that's 863-288-0944, or visit my website, todddantzler.com. I look forward to hearing your questions and feedback, and please take care.